So we're fortunate we have individuals that are able to capture that moment and capture that time in history that can continue to educate us, and so that we can pass down history, why we have the park there and why we're doing the thing that we do. So we have an individual that we're recognizing today, and that's David W. Carter, in honor of Black History Month, and the author and the historian. Mr. Carter? Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Pleasure.
And what we're doing is we're going to present a resolution in honor of David W. Carter's contribution to the African American history. And it's named Mayday Over Wichita. Whereas David W. Carter is a historian, author, educator in Kansas, specializing in military and social history. And whereas Mr. Carter, originally from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, is currently residing in Topeka, Kansas, and previously served in the U.S. Air Force stationed at McConnell Air Force Base. And whereas Mr. Carter has penned a riveting, detailed biography, Mayday Over Wichita, of the disaster that is known locally as the Piatt Street plane crash that occurred on January the 16th, 1965, killing 23 residents on North Piatt, including an unborn child. And whereas Mr. Carter's literary contribution has helped to clarify the confusion and dispel the rumors that have surrounded the fatal crash that occurred during a time of racial tension in the city of Wichita, and will continue to heal those survivors whose lives were forever changed. Given on this day, it is certainly my honor, and now therefore I resolve that I, Carl Brewer, Mayor of the City of Wichita, Kansas, do hereby recognize David W. Carter during Black History Month in order of this year's theme, Civil Rights in America, signed on this day on behalf of the Wichita City Council and the citizens of the City of Wichita. It's our honor to present this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. It's both an honor and a privilege to be here this morning. On the drive down, I had a few thoughts, and the first one was just how much this tragedy really impacted this community, but how we are now healing from that due to many individuals throughout the community, not just myself, who are continuing to retell this story. Yeah, I don't mind sharing it, and I've shared it on several other occasions. Both of my parents were illiterate. They couldn't read or write, and as a result, they struggled for their entire lives. And a recurring thought that I have is, what didn't they know? Especially, what didn't they know about their own history? And so it's vitally important that we continue to tell not just the major themes in history, but also these local stories that affected so many people, not just here in Wichita, especially this tragedy, but throughout the country. I've been asked to read a short passage from my book this morning, and I promise I will be brief. So I would ask that you just listen in on what many individuals experienced and how it affected the entire community that morning, and then just sent shockwaves throughout our country as well. 4 miles away at a cathedral near the intersection of Central and Broadway streets, Larry McDowell was about to marry his fiancée, Kathy Angle. Suddenly, the priest burst forth from his office and called the congregation's attention to a north-facing window. The scene outside the window looked ominous, Larry remembered. A menacing plume of black smoke was rolling upward from North Wichita, spreading across the sky like a dark pall. It was a foreboding sight. 3 miles away, Captain Earl Tanner was relaxing on his day off from the Wichita Fire Department. Shortly after 9:30 a.m., his house shook abruptly and his windows rattled. Then his phone rang. It was Fire Chief Tom McGoy, who told Tanner, "Hit the road, it's a big plane." 2.5 miles away at 13th and Waco Street, 12-year-old Barbara Fredrickson was sitting in a class at Holy Savior Catholic Church when the children dashed towards the window, frightened by an awful roar outside. "I saw the smoke trailing from the rear," said Barbara. "Then the plane dropped out of sight. I saw a bright glare that hurt my eyes." Nearly 1.5 miles away, a shopkeeper working at 21st and Market Street recalled the front door to his business being swiftly blown open with a gust of wind and his walls shuddering from a quick vibration. Ruby Brown, who lived 5 blocks from the crash site, said she was awakened by a high-pitched whistling and spitting that sounded like a monster outside of her bedroom window. It was just like an earthquake. The floor trembled beneath me. I've been in an earthquake before, said Ruby, and that's just what it felt like. Ruby ran to her front door and discovered that everything was all black, as if someone had blotted out the sun. The smoke had an awful smell, and it began to choke me. So I opened the door and closed the door and watched from my window. Just beyond the wall of smoke and fire, her neighbors were fighting for their lives. 2 blocks away, 10-year-old Victor Daniels was stirred by a terrible rumble overhead and the ground shaking violently. Running toward Piatt Street to find out what happened, he encountered chaos, panic, and grisly images. Victor's father, grandmother, and 3 cousins were inside of 2037 North Piatt, now consumed with implacable fire. Mildred Hill was working in her small carry-out restaurant a block and a half away from the impact point. A thick steel door located at the back of her business was thrust wide open by the vehement force of Raggy 42's collision. I had a kitchen knife stuck in the door by the lock to help hold it shut. It snapped that kitchen knife in 2 like a matchstick, said Mildred. The heat wave that followed felt just like you were standing right up against a hot stove. I had to hold on to the door to keep it shut, or I wouldn't have been able to stand it, she remembered. 1 block southwest of the impact point at 1950 North Minnesota, Mrs. Edward Johnson was drinking her morning coffee in her kitchen when a 3-foot-long slab of metal from Raggy 42 pierced the roof, nearly decapitating her. One of the wings from Raggy 42 sheared off and cut the Allens residence at 2065 North Piatt in 2, slicing through the front room and bedroom, but, amazingly, leaving the occupants unharmed. A 16-year-old boy, Stu Markey, was working as a carryout only yards away at Razzouk's supermarket. He described the terrifying scene he witnessed while putting groceries into a car. I was walking back to the store when I happened to look up. I didn't hear anything, but I saw this huge plane barely above the rooftop. The plane was banking to the left, and the smoke was pouring out from the midsection. I looked at it again and dived behind a car. The concussion was so strong it rocked the car. When I looked up again, it seemed as if the whole ground was on fire with flames, shooting higher than I've ever seen. I ran back to the store. Some thought it was an earthquake. Others thought there was an explosion at the Derby oil refinery nearby. Many witnesses remembered hearing what sounded like a tornado just before the impact. The heat, wave, and concussion from the fallen tanker were far-reaching. Window glass on cars and houses instantly shattered for several blocks. The large display windows at Razzouk's supermarket burst almost immediately. Automobiles were flipped upside down like pancakes. Trees were uprooted and straightaway torched. Lampways became twisted metal wires, and homes were violently pockmarked by flaming debris hurled from the wreckage. Homes once full with furniture and people were now scattered. Stoves, refrigerators, hot water tanks, even bathing facilities. The bathtub, shower stalls, toilet stools were completely blown clear out in the backyard, recalled witnesses. Fragments from the tanker shot out like missiles, ripping through walls and ceilings, while the shock wave carried by the explosion hurled residents from their beds and across their living rooms. As Cora Bell Williams at 2048 North Piatt remembered, the explosion picked me up off my chair onto the floor, tumbled me out of it, and threw me across the floor. The window she had been peacefully gazing out of only seconds earlier was now in pieces. I grabbed my daughter and ran out the back door. I tried to get in the front yard, but the heat was too much, said Williams. Ola M. Sanders, who was relaxing inside her home at 1627 North Ohio when the crash occurred, described the frightful morning. We were indoors, watching television, drinking coffee. All of a sudden, there was a whomp, and the windows and doors bowed in and out like they'd sucked in a breath and let it out. We ran outside to look, and to the north, we could see this huge cloud rising. We thought the Russians had dropped a bomb on us. We saw all the people standing around and the houses on fire. It was like everyone was in a state of shock, just standing there. Death and destruction claimed Piatt Street that morning. Few made it out alive. At 204 South Main Street, above Wichita's original 1892 City Hall building, the lofty clock tower read the time, 9:31 a.m. 4 minutes had passed since Raggy 42 departed the McConnell runway. And so I say again, this was a story that I encountered 10 years ago when I arrived here from the Air Force, and I just felt compelled to talk about it because I believe that's where healing really begins.